today we are continuing our exploration of transactional analysis and how we might apply that in our coaching programs with our clients. And Gregor, we're talking about a new avatar, I guess would be the right word to use today, aren't we?
Yeah, this time we're talking about Adam. He's 45 and he's been recently promoted to the marketing director of a larger company, about 6,000 employees. But since he's been recently promoted, he is struggling a bit. It's his first manager role. He's struggling to delegate, he's working all hours, and we think he's at risk of burnout if he doesn't find a better balance. So we're also not sure about his performance management, and he's inherited some poor performers that need to pull the socks up or be banished out of the business. And one challenge is that his manager is based in Italy and isn't able to give him much support. So he's a little bit on his own. So we're there partly as to support him, because there's not very many people around to do that for him within the organisation.
Yeah, I mean, he likes to get into the detail, doesn't he? And he's just feeling overwhelmed and struggling with maybe a bit of lack of support, as you've said. And this is very much the kind of description I would say would apply to a lot of clients that I work with. You know, where a client has been promoted because they're considered to be top talent, but actually when it's that first manager of managers role. And yes, there are workshops and courses and things you can go on and they can be really useful. But actually, when you're faced with the reality of doing your job, these sorts of challenges are very, very common and the sorts of things that people tend to bring to coaching.
From a TA perspective, as we get to know him, you know, it's obvious there's drivers present, like please others, try hard, be strong, hurry up. You know, he says, I don't have time to be strategic. You know, he speaks quite fast. So I think one of the things is going into the challenges for the coaching relationship is that he's coming across, he's wanting quick answers and hints and tips, isn't he? And it's likely he's probably so if you go back to one of our other podcasts about vertical development, he's likely an expert level of action logic, and that's quite often when you get coaches that they want the hints and tips, they want to be given input. And that's not unrealistic, I suppose, in a new role, a new level. He doesn't know how to do certain things, especially if his boss is unavailable.
Well, yes, and I think then when his boss is unavailable, you know, there is a desire then, or could be a desire to sort of lean on the coach for that support and even for that guidance. And so there's a risk of, I guess, of potential dependency there, or of us being pulled into either that position of parent, or on the drama triangle, as we've talked about in a previous episode, going into that rescue mode, you know, like let me come in and help you. And particularly with Adam, you know, he's often told he's too nice. And so when you've got a client who is generally nice and, you know, amenable and wants to do well, but is sort of struggling, there is quite a strong temptation to want to go in and make it all better.
Yeah. And I think this is a perfect example of the coach being, it's a situation where you could be tempted into rescue quite easy, especially if he is feeling a little bit sorry for himself, or especially we think with these, in a situation where you have someone with a be strong driver, they won't voice their needs that are being unmet. And so you may not get those needs being unmet until you develop more trust.
Yeah.
So especially if he's wanting hints and tips, it's one of those situations where you may actually have to go into a little bit of mentor mode until you generate the trust that means he can be more vulnerable with you.
Yeah. And I guess the other way I think about that also is actually supporting him to think about where else might he get those hints and tips. So, you know, there may well be a mentor elsewhere within the organisation, or a colleague, or, you know, someone else that he can talk to who can perhaps play that role, which helps keep that clean line, doesn't it, as a coach?
Yeah, and I think things like are quite often, if people are, he might talk about somebody, you know, he's no good at networking and he's expected to do more networking in this role. I said, well, who in your organization is really good at that,
Exactly. Yeah.
and get them to find people that are exemplars that he can go to. And that's where things like feed forward can really help.
Mm.
Him going out and seeking advice from his peers and his seniors, which gets him doing stuff for himself. You're not doing it for him, but it's still really practical, grounded, and he can get on with doing some stuff. So I think as you're developing this trusted relationship, is get him into things that he can do practically for himself, such that you're not getting tempted into this rescuer role.
Mm. I think often what can happen as well is when you're working with a client who is in overwhelm, who is struggling, and is perhaps inviting you into rescue, the chances are they're going to be a victim. And actually, then they can feel quite powerless and quite lost. But actually, helping them to articulate what it is that they need, and just that in itself can be quite a useful practice. Voicing what their needs are, and then thinking about what are some steps you can take towards meeting those for yourself, as opposed to
Yes.
jumping in and trying to make it better.
So I'm thinking, one of the challenges he's got is delegation. So there's obvious practical things you can do, supplying with some technique. You may not have some technique, you may not be trained in delegation. So that, again, being very careful not to go into rescue mode, you might want to give them some technique, talk about RACI, that sort of stuff.
So RACI, we should
But,
just clarify for listeners,
oh, yeah,
is
sorry. So
what that
RACI
means.
stands for responsibility. Well, you can look it up on Wikipedia, but it stands for responsibility. There we
Accountability.
go. Accountability, yeah. Consult and inform. And for
Yeah,
any tasks, there's only one accountable. There are could be multiple responsibles, multiple consult, and multiple inform. So it gets you using a RACI matrix, thinking about who does what. And quite often, when people are struggling, it's because they're actually taking on the accountability of their boss, for example. So you find people in overwhelm often. Sometimes they're doing that, especially if they're getting told they're being too nice.
yeah.
Clearly, you'd get him to unpack his beliefs. But I think we've said that using TA that you would expose the model. So,
Mm-hmm.
example, exposing the parent-adult-child model for him here
Mm.
in the context of delegation is, if he is being too nice, is he in negative nurturing parent?
Yeah.
Is he being too parental to his reports and therefore robbing them of the opportunity to develop because he's doing stuff for them? He's a rescuer.
What I think is really interesting here is really tuning into the language that they're using. So you kind of listening to what Adam might be saying around so and so in his team who hasn't delivered something, and in fact I had a client the other week who was saying something along these lines where there was a deadline and the person hadn't met the deadline, and so my client was being understanding about that and extending the deadline, and then it starts to get a bit stupid, and because actually she ends up taking on the work herself and getting it done. And so really tuning into the language and thinking about, well, is the deadline, what does a deadline actually mean to you? Um, and then thinking about it, thinking with that model in the back of your mind, is there something here around parent, adult, child? And then also thinking about the drama triangle. Where are you in the drama triangle right now? Are you in rescuer? Where are you? And so really using the models when you shared them to tune into their language and just, I think I'm hearing something here. Are you noticing that? Or, what role might you be playing here? And just helping provide that lens. It's a different way of helping them to explore their behavior.
Yeah, and different coaches have different modalities, but they can they can use alongside this model. I realize that, again, it's easy for me to go into the lingo. I've used something we've not covered, the functional model, and I think it's a bit too big to cover here. But in each aspect of the ego states, like parent and child, you'll have positive and negative aspects of them. So if you think of controlling or critical parent, It's okay to be controlling if you're telling a child, don't put your fingers in the fire. That's a positive parent, but a negative controlling parent would be those sorts of bosses that are very micromanaging and controlling, etc. But there's this idea of parents being nurturing. So negative nurturing parent is when you think of, a 7-year-old's actually capable of getting up, probably feeding themselves, clothing themselves, and maybe even get themselves to school. But no 7-year-old really nowadays gets allowed to do that because their parents do stuff for them. You don't get latchkey kids anymore. In fact, people might not even be familiar with that term anymore. But certainly when I grew up,
Yeah, I think you probably get a few more latchkey kids, people who are kind of commuting, to work and that sort of thing now post-COVID world. I think there's probably a bit more of that. But no, I agree with you, and I think it's very easy to do more for your children than you need to, right?
you want to care. There's your children, so therefore you do things for them. But actually, some of the things can actually be negative because I turned up at university knowing how to do the washing because my father left when I was 13 and it was just me and my mum, and she was quite pushed me to be very independent. But I remember this kid, and he was 18, and he was at this laundry machine. He had a bag of washing and some washing powder. He was totally lost. He had no idea what to do because his mum had always done it for him. So I had to teach him how to use a washing machine. But that's what we mean by negative nurturing parent.
Yeah, but I guess this is also relevant here because we bring our experiences with us into the workplace. So the way that we are parented, the way that we parent, that's how we show up as a manager. And so if we've learned that to be a responsible parent is to take care of, is to give a lot, is to do too much in inverted commas, um, then actually that's likely to be how we show up as a manager. And it's not about judging and saying it's right or wrong, but it's about shining the light onto that and saying, and how is that working for you as a manager in this kind of professional setting?
And that's exactly the right thing. If you want to be nice, you want to care for people, you care for your people, but actually what you're doing is you might be robbing them of the opportunity to develop. And what you're doing is you're putting yourself into overwhelm at work such that you're not able to care for your real children properly. So there's all those things you can give. So I think when you think about delegation, when people are struggling with delegation, quite often what you do is people are caring too much and they're a negative nurturing parent.
Yeah, and I think that in my experience, a useful way of kind of unpacking that a little bit is you mentioned this just now, but is unpacking those beliefs. So really, there's a number of different ways of unpacking beliefs, and coaches will use different approaches. But really, kind of again, tuning into your client's language. What is it that they're saying? What is the story they're telling themselves about delegation? And then kind of scratching beneath that and digging a little bit deeper. What is the belief that you're holding that means that's your approach to delegation? And often that will unearth, maybe there's a belief that comes from childhood. And so that can be a really powerful way of just, and again, this is the kind of thing that Adam probably isn't ever getting the opportunity to have this kind of conversation with anyone else, where someone is actually really challenging him to think through what is the story you tell yourself when it comes to delegation. For example, it might be, it's only going to be done properly if I do it. That might be one of them.
Yeah, if somebody's a bit of a perfectionist. I mean, actually, Adam doesn't have much of a be perfect driver.
Mm.
So that's not what's going on for him. But if somebody does have a be perfect driver, quite often it's, well, the only way I'm going to get it done properly is it's okay. Well, they're never going to be able to progress in their career if they're going to continue like that. So
Yeah,
it's that sort of challenge. So I
yeah,
think the thinking about Adam is so much of what is challenging him is just getting the thing of delegation right. But all of the drivers that have been there that have made him successful to this point are actually counter to what he needs to be doing now. And if he doesn't nail delegation at manager or managers, he's really going to struggle. He's really going to
yeah.
go into overwhelm.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing with him, is he is risking burning out. He's got really poor work-life balance, even though I hate that term. And I think the thing, again, looking at it from a TA perspective, is bringing into his awareness how, by following his early programming, he's damaging his life balance now.
Yes. And so in terms of what we really mean by that, when we say following his early programming, and again, we've talked about this in other episodes, but essentially it's about what did he learn as a child? What were the conditioned tendencies he developed as a child in order to survive within his family of origin system?
And perform.
And perform. Yeah, exactly. And one of his drivers is pleasing others, if what he learned was, for example, to please his parents, then that is very much going to be what he brings into his role as a manager, pleasing his boss, but also pleasing his team, so that they like him and they all get on well, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah. So this is, again, the same message, that those things that you learn early on have been really good for you and really productive for you, but they may be counterproductive for you now. And it's just by bringing those into your awareness, really, a lot of things that's coming from basically contaminations from parent and child. You think this is your adult, and it's only once you get those things brought into your awareness, you realize, this is my parent or my child, not my adult. I need to make a decision from adult. And if I give an example of that, a really practical example, quite often we talk about parent and child and adult as singular ego states, and they're not. There are lots and lots of parts of ourselves that are coming from a parent or a child ego state. So to give a really practical example for people, I'm in the shower this morning. I have a cold shower every morning because of my MS. And so I stay under a really cold shower for 2 minutes. And it's not a nice experience. So every morning when I'm having my shower, I have this negotiation going on between my parent and my child parts. And my parent child part is saying, now remember, you've got to have your 2 minute cold shower. And the child part is saying, I don't want to. It's really uncomfortable. And I hear this going on in my head. And the adult comes in and says, no, I know it's good for me. I'm going to do it. And you two can just shut up. And so it gives you a really practical example of what goes on. We carry these parent and child parts around with us. And it's about becoming aware of them and then making a choice from adult. I hope that's a practical example.
No, and I love it, and I think it is about bringing it into awareness, which is what you've just illustrated there, and then cutting through that noise, so that you can, in adult, here and now, as Adam, if he's thinking about someone in his team who's not delivered a piece of work, and that means he's going to end up working his weekend, so that person doesn't. Where are his boundaries as an adult in the here and now, as a manager of this person? Is that okay? Probably not. So how do you have that conversation? And it's such a great coaching question that you and I have talked about again, and it's one of our coaching cards questions. So if I'm saying yes to this, so if Adam's saying yes to doing so-and-so's work, that weekend, what is he saying no to? No to his downtime, no to rest and recuperation, no to family time, friend time, sport, exercise, sleep, whatever it might be. And that is a really seemingly simple question, but actually very powerful one when you actually really bring it into practice and say, okay, so if I say yes to doing my team members' work this weekend so they get a lovely weekend off, what am I saying no to?
Yeah.
And that can really cut through that noise, right? And bring you into adult here and now as a manager. What is the choice I'm making right here?
And I think the other thing, when we were profiling Adam, we were thinking about this, like try hard and also hurry up driver. And what you quite often find is, so it'll be clear for people in the video, but for those on audio, I'll say, when people, they're talking a little bit of strain in their voice, or they might have their head up, their hand up to the side of their head. It's like, it's difficult. It's really challenging. That is often indicative that their try-hard driver is running. And quite often they'll see things as a struggle, as a binary, when they're not.
Yeah.
And everything has to be done now if they've got a hurry-up driver as well. And it's just that thing about, what's with the challenging, apart from asking questions, it's real challenging the timescales.
Yeah.
Is it really that hard? Is there a struggle between these two things? And
Yeah.
so just you can pick up in people's body language, okay, that sort of strain is very typical of somebody running a try-hard driver. When somebody's running a Be Perfect driver, again for audio, what I'm doing is I'm ticking off things on my fingers. When you see people ticking, there's this and this and this, and they're ticking off things on the figure. That's very clearly a Be Perfect driver in action. That's a really good indication of that. So there's all sorts of things you can pick up in body language that tells you, in tonality, tells you what driver someone is running at that time. And that gives you clues as to what you can do. That's another thing why I think tea is such a useful thing to have in your toolkit as a coach.
I was just going to say, we're probably thinking about the 3 tips.
So our 3 tips, what's our first?
Well, I think there's something here around, and often clients are kind of, this is new to them, but the idea that their early programming or those conditioned tendencies that they've developed, how, yes, they've been great in many, many ways, they've been really beneficial, but actually when they end up being kind of their main drivers as they progress through life and through their career, it can actually sometimes be quite limiting. And so just raising the awareness of, you can be intentional, you can be choiceful about when you allow these to be in charge and when actually they're less useful.
Yeah, I think the thing to make very present there is it beneficial to them, but when activated unconsciously, it's likely to limit what's going on, their opportunities here. And I think that's one of the things that we haven't talked about, but quite often things like this are triggered by outside. So, and again, from our coaching card questions, is this a full-time problem or a part-time problem?
Yes.
There's a part-time problem, it's probably going to be triggered. So that's when people get triggered into child. So people who struggle with their confidence, when does that happen? Oh, it's when this person is in the room, or when really senior people are in the room. So it's triggering them into child. They might be activating a driver like please others. So triggers. So we're going to have 4 tips rather than 3, but I think that is helping your client become trigger aware alongside this model of parent, adult, child in particular, really helps them see when they're being triggered into child or triggered into parent. And that's really useful.
And I think there's something there that, obviously with this, we are being a little bit of going into a little bit of teacher mode. We are introducing theory. We are introducing models. There is a bit of content-led coaching going on here, and not all coaches are comfortable with that approach. But actually, what I find is you don't have to do a really deep dive. It can be a relatively high-level introduction, and then often you can send a follow-up email or something if you want to. But actually just making it real, making it easy and accessible to the client, it just provides such a valuable lens. And in my experience, when I do that, clients go, oh, wow, yeah, I get that now. And that's really useful.
What really works is when you do introduce theory is you quickly make it real and relevant them and applying it to their challenges and to get them using it. The reason you are teaching them this is so they can then use it. So thank you, everybody, for listening and viewing us, for taking time to listen to the show. We appreciate any feedback, and we're really keen to respond to any questions that are out there about using and implementing, specifically in this case, TA and coaching in organizations. So please email us on info@thecoachingquestion.com. And clearly we'll put some stuff in the show notes as well. And it always really helps us if you can give us a rating on iTunes as one of your preferred, or in your preferred podcasting or video platform. And the next show will be another example with Adam, another one of his challenges and how we use TA with helping him get on with his career. So cheers, everyone.
Thanks for listening.